The marble floors of North Shore Dental Center gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Savannah Pemberton adjusted her Hermes scarf and checked her diamond-studded watch. At 28, she commanded attention wherever she went, from her penthouse office overlooking Lake Michigan to the exclusive boutiques on Chicago's Magnificent Mile. Her father's real estate empire had given her everything money could buy, including the belief that success was simply a matter of breeding and proper connections. "Miss Pemberton?" The receptionist's voice carried the practiced deference Savannah had grown accustomed to. "Dr. Williams will see you now." Savannah swept past the waiting area, her designer heels clicking authoritatively. She barely glanced at the other patients, a construction worker holding his jaw, an elderly woman clutching a Medicare card, a young mother bouncing a crying baby. These were the people her world rarely intersected with, background noise to her carefully curated existence. The dental hygienist, a middle-aged Latina woman named Carmen, prepared the examination chair. "How are you today, Miss Pemberton?" "Fine," Savannah replied curtly, settling into the chair without making eye contact. She scrolled through her phone, responding to texts from her tennis instructor about rescheduling their private lesson at the country club. Her world revolved around charity galas, where she wrote checks that meant nothing to her bank account, art gallery openings where she networked with other trust fund beneficiaries, and spa appointments that filled the void of actual purpose. "I heard there was some kind of protest downtown," Carmen mentioned while adjusting the overhead light. "Something about affordable housing?" Savannah's perfectly manicured fingers paused over her phone screen. "Oh, that," she said dismissively, her voice carrying the practiced indifference of someone who had never worried about rent. "Probably just people who haven't figured out how to better themselves. Chicago has plenty of opportunities for those willing to work for them." The words came so naturally, so effortlessly, that Savannah didn't even recognize the privilege embedded in every syllable. She had been raised in Kenilworth, where the poorest family still had a seven-figure net worth, where diversity meant having neighbors who were both Republican and Democrat. Her understanding of struggle extended only to choosing between winter, homes in Aspen, or the Hamptons. Carmen's expression shifted slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. "Dr. Williams will be right in," she said quietly, her tone noticeably cooler. As Savannah waited, she admired her reflection in the mirror above the dental chair. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless despite the early morning appointment. She looked like what she was, American royalty, untouchable and pristine. The protest downtown felt as distant as a news report from another country. "Ready for your cleaning, Miss Pemberton?" Dr. Williams appeared in the doorway, and Savannah's breath caught slightly. She had expected the elderly Dr. Henderson, who had retired last month. Instead, she found herself looking at a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his early 30s, his warm brown eyes professional but genuinely kind. His white coat was pristine, and his smile revealed perfect teeth that spoke to his expertise. "You're not Dr. Henderson," Savannah said, her tone carrying just enough surprise to sound mildly accusatory. "Dr. Marcus Williams," he replied, extending a firm handshake that Savannah reluctantly accepted. "I've taken over Dr. Henderson's practice. I promise you're in excellent hands." Savannah leaned back in the chair, suddenly hyper-aware of the power dynamic. In her world, she was accustomed to being the one with authority, the one whose name opened doors and commanded respect. But here, in this sterile room, Dr. Williams held the expertise and control. "Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here." Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts, yes, every single comment, and it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. The Pemberton family gathered for their weekly Sunday dinner at the Union League Club, their private booth overlooking the Chicago River. Savannah's father, Reginald Pemberton III, cut into his prime rib while discussing the latest city council decisions that affected his portfolio of luxury developments. Her mother, Victoria, picked delicately at her Dover soul, more concerned with the social implications than the actual governance. "Darling, you seem distracted?" Victoria observed, noting Savannah's unusual quietness. "Is everything all right?" Savannah hesitated, then decided to share. "I had a new dentist today, Dr. Williams. He seemed competent." Her father's fork paused mid-air. "Williams? What happened to Henderson?" "Retired. This new doctor took over." The practice. Savannah found herself defending something she wasn't sure needed defending. His credentials were prominently displayed: Harvard Dental School, residency at Northwestern. Reginald exchanged a meaningful look with his wife. "Well, I suppose if he went to Harvard, he must have had some kind of scholarship assistance," he said carefully. Good for him for making something of himself. The subtle condescension in his tone made Savannah's stomach tighten unexpectedly. She had grown up hearing these conversations, had participated in them countless times without question. Her family prided itself on being progressive. They donated to the right causes, attended diversity events when socially advantageous, and hired people of all backgrounds for their service staff. But beneath the polished veneer lay assumptions. That felt suddenly uncomfortable. "Maybe he earned it," Savannah found herself saying, then immediately wondered where the words had come from. Victoria laughed, a tinkling sound that had been cultivated through years of finishing school. "Of course, sweetheart, but you know how these programs work. They have quotas to fill, standards to meet. It's wonderful that opportunities exist for those less fortunate." Savannah nodded automatically, but something felt off. Dr. Williams seemed like someone who needed help or special consideration. He had moved through his examination with quiet confidence, his hands steady and sure, his knowledge evident in every gesture. When he had explained her treatment plan, his voice carried the authority of someone who had earned his position through merit, not circumstance. Her brother, Reginald IV, joined the conversation from across the table. "Speaking of quotas, did you see the news about that affordable housing proposal? They want to put subsidized units in Lincoln Park. Can you imagine? Ridiculous." Reginald III agreed. "Property values aside, it's not fair to the families who worked hard to afford those neighborhoods. Why should they have their investment threatened by people who haven't earned the same level of success?" The conversation continued around Savannah, but her mind kept drifting back to Dr. Williams. There had been something in his eyes when he looked at her x-rays, a focus and intelligence that had nothing to do with affirmative action or special programs. He had caught a potential issue that Dr. Henderson had missed for months, a small cavity that could have become a major problem if left untreated. "Savannah?" Her mother's voice cut through her thoughts. "Your father asked about the Whitman Foundation. Gala next weekend. Will you be attending with Charles?" Charles Whitman III, her on-again, off-again boyfriend from her social circle. Old money, newer arrogance, and the assumption that Savannah would eventually marry within her class because that's what people like them did. The thought of spending another evening listening to him complain about capital gains taxes while surrounded by ice sculptures and champagne fountains suddenly felt exhausting. "I'm not sure," Savannah replied, surprising herself and her family. "I might have other plans." The silence that followed felt weighted. In the Pemberton family, there were no other plans that took precedence over social obligations. Their calendar was a carefully orchestrated dance of networking events, charity, functions, and strategic social appearances. Other plans? Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched delicately. "With whom, darling?" Savannah didn't have an answer. She didn't have other plans, but for the first time in her life, the predictable rhythm of her existence felt suffocating. She thought about the patients in Dr. Williams' waiting room, people dealing with real problems and genuine struggles, and wondered what their Sunday dinners looked like. Did they gather around expensive tables discussing stock portfolios and property values, or were they navigating challenges she had never had to consider? The realization that she had never questioned her family's worldview before today unsettled her. She had been raised to believe that their success was proof of their superiority, that their lifestyle was the natural result of hard work and good breeding. But sitting in that elegant dining room, surrounded by inherited wealth and inherited prejudices, Savannah felt something she had never experienced before: doubt. The following Tuesday, Savannah found herself at Northwestern Memorial Hospital's annual fundraising luncheon, an event where Chicago's elite gathered to write tax-deductible checks while enjoying lobster bisque and self-congratulation. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, air-kissing acquaintances and making small talk about vacation homes and investment strategies. "Savannah, darling," Priscilla Ashworth Kane approached with her usual dramatic flourish. Diamond. Tennis bracelet catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. "Have you heard about the new dental practice that opened in Lincoln Park? Some people are saying it's quite good, though I can't imagine why anyone would leave Dr. Weinstein on the Gold Coast." "Actually," Savannah found herself saying, "I've been seeing a new dentist myself. Dr. Williams took over Dr. Henderson's practice." "Oh, how interesting." Priscilla's tone suggested it was anything but. "I'm sure he's perfectly adequate. These community practices serve an important purpose, don't they? Not everyone can afford the more established practices downtown." Savannah felt a familiar irritation building, though she couldn't quite identify its source. "His credentials are impeccable, actually. Harvard-trained with specialty certifications I'd never even heard of." "Well, of course," Priscilla agreed quickly, sensing she had touched a nerve. "I'm sure he's very qualified. It's wonderful that these opportunities exist now, isn't it? Such progress." The conversation moved on, but Savannah found herself increasingly uncomfortable with the subtle implications woven through every exchange. When the keynote speaker, a hospital administrator, mentioned their new community outreach program, she watched the polite applause around her with growing awareness. These were people who donated millions to medical research, but balked at the thought of their own neighborhoods becoming more diverse. During the silent auction, Savannah bid aggressively on a weekend getaway package to Martha's Vineyard, partly because she wanted it, and partly because she could afford to outbid the young physician standing beside her. She watched his face fall as the price climbed beyond his reach and felt a momentary satisfaction that immediately curdled into shame. "Excellent choice," the auction coordinator, a woman in her 50s with impeccable taste and practiced deference, complimented Savannah. "Dr. Rodriguez was quite interested in that package, but I think it's better suited to someone who can truly appreciate the exclusive nature of the venue." The casual dismissal of Dr. Rodriguez's interest, the assumption that Savannah was more deserving simply because she had more money, struck her as suddenly grotesque. She had grown up believing that her ability to afford luxury was proof of her worthiness to receive it, but standing there with her winning bid slip, she wondered what made her more qualified for a beach vacation than a doctor who probably saved lives every day. After lunch, Savannah decided to walk back to her office rather than take her usual Uber Black. The September air was crisp, and the city felt different at street level than from behind tinted windows. She passed construction, workers on their lunch break, sharing sandwiches and laughing about something on one of their phones. A few blocks later, she saw a group of nurses from the hospital grabbing coffee from a street cart, their scrubs rumpled from long shifts, but their conversation animated and genuine. These were people who worked for their paychecks, who had earned their positions through training and dedication rather than inheritance and connections. Savannah realized she had never really seen them as individuals before. They had been part of the scenery, service providers, and background characters in her carefully orchestrated life. At a crosswalk, she found herself standing next to a tall, black man in scrubs, his hospital ID badge identifying him as Marcus Williams, DDS. Her breath caught as she recognized her dentist, looking tired but content as he waited for the light to change. "Dr. Williams," she said, surprising herself by speaking first. He turned, and his professional smile shifted to something more genuine when he recognized her. "Miss Pemberton, what brings you to this part of town?" "Hospital fundraiser," she replied, then felt compelled to add, "I was just walking back to my office. I was grabbing lunch between appointments," he said, holding up a simple brown bag. "There's a great Vietnamese place a few blocks from here. Best po in Chicago, and it costs less than a coffee at Starbucks." Something about the way he said it, without defensiveness or apology, just stating a fact, made Savannah realize how differently they navigated the same city. For her, restaurant choices were about ambiance and exclusivity. For him, they were about value and authenticity. The light changed, and they walked together for a block, making polite conversation about the weather and the city's ongoing construction projects. But Savannah found herself studying him peripherally, noting the confidence in his stride, the way other pedestrians unconsciously made room for him, not out of deference but out of respect for his obvious competence and presence. "This is my stop," he said, as they reached a modest office building that housed several medical practices. "See you next week for your follow-up." As Savannah continued toward her gleaming downtown tower, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Dr. Williams hadn't seemed impressed by her designer outfit or her Hermes bag. He had treated her with the same professional courtesy he probably extended to all his patients, regardless of their bank account balance. For someone accustomed to special treatment based on her family name and financial status, his egalitarian approach felt both refreshing and unsettling. By the time she reached her office, Savannah was beginning to question assumptions she had never thought to examine before. The following week, Savannah arrived at Dr. Williams's office for her follow-up appointment to find the waiting room buzzing with tension. The usual mix of patients sat with tense expressions, and she could hear raised voices from the reception. "Area, I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen, but without insurance approval, we can't perform the procedure today." The receptionist, a young black woman named Keisha, was explaining patiently to an elderly Asian woman who clutched a tissue to her swollen jaw. "But I'm in so much pain," Mrs. Chen replied, her accent thick with distress. "I saved money. I can pay something now." Savannah took her usual seat in the corner, pulling out her phone to avoid the uncomfortable scene. She had never had to worry about insurance approval or payment plans. Her father's platinum health coverage took care of everything, and her trust fund meant she could afford any procedure without a second thought. "What's the holdup?" demanded a voice behind her. Savannah turned to see a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit, his tone sharp with impatience. "I have a conference call in an hour. Dr. Williams is handling an emergency," Keisha explained evenly. "There was a construction accident, and he's treating one of the workers pro bono while we wait for the ambulance." The businessman scoffed. "That's not my problem. I made an appointment. I expect to be seen on time. This isn't a charity clinic." Savannah felt her cheeks flush with unexpected embarrassment. The man's attitude mirrored her own usual approach to service providers, entitled, demanding, dismissive of circumstances beyond their control. But hearing it from someone else, she realized how ugly it sounded. "Sir, if you'd like to reschedule," Keisha began. "I want to speak to the dentist." "Immediately," the man interrupted, his voice rising. "This is completely unprofessional." At that moment, Dr. Williams emerged from the back, his scrubs splattered with blood, his face drawn with concentration and fatigue. He moved directly to Mrs. Chen, kneeling beside her chair to speak quietly in what sounded like basic Mandarin. Her face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Mr. Patterson," Dr. Williams addressed the angry businessman without standing up. "I understand your frustration. Keisha can reschedule you for tomorrow morning first appointment. But right now, Mrs. Chen needs emergency treatment, and the construction worker I just stabilized is on his way to the hospital." "I don't care about your charity cases," Patterson snapped. "I'm a paying customer, and I expect—" "You expect what?" Dr. Williams stood slowly, his 6'2" frame suddenly seeming imposing. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "You expect me to let a woman suffer in agony because you have a phone call? You expect me to let a man potentially lose his teeth because your time is more valuable than his well-being?" The waiting room had gone completely silent. Savannah watched, transfixed, as Dr. Williams continued. "Every person in this office receives the same quality of care, Mr. Patterson. Your insurance might be better, your car might be more expensive, but your teeth aren't more important than anyone else's. If you can't accept that, I suggest you find another dentist." Patterson's face turned red. "I'll be reporting this to the dental board. This is discrimination, pure and simple. Report away." Dr. Williams replied evenly. "But right now, I have patients who need me." As Patterson stormed out, muttering threats and obscenities, Dr. Williams turned to the remaining patients. "I apologize for the delay, everyone. We'll get through the schedule, even if we run late. Mrs. Chen, let's get you out of pain first." Savannah sat frozen in her chair, her mind reeling. She had witnessed something she had never seen before. Someone with less social power and privilege standing up to someone with more. Not with anger or defensiveness, but with quiet moral authority. Dr. Williams had made it clear that human dignity trumped social status, and he had been willing to lose a wealthy patient to maintain that principle. When her name was finally called, 2 hours later, Savannah found herself unusually nervous. As she settled into the examination chair, she couldn't meet Dr. Williams's eyes directly. "I'm sorry about the wait," he said, washing his hands thoroughly. "It's been a challenging day." "The construction worker, is he okay?" she found herself asking. Dr. Williams paused, seeming surprised by her concern. "He'll be fine. Lost 2 teeth, but we saved the rest. His employer doesn't provide dental coverage, so he was trying to tough it out until payday. Sometimes that makes things worse." Savannah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She thought about her own dental care. Preventive cleanings every 6 months, cosmetic whitening whenever she wanted it, never a moment's worry about cost or coverage. The construction worker's dilemma was as foreign to her as space travel. Yet Dr. Williams had treated it as an emergency worthy of disrupting his entire schedule. "Open wide," Dr. Williams said gently, adjusting the overhead light. "Only if you promise to be gentle," Savannah replied, the flirtatious comment slipping out automatically. A reflex from her world where charm and sexuality were currencies. She had always used to get what she wanted. But Dr. Williams didn't respond with the appreciative smile she expected. Instead, he paused, his expression becoming more formal and distant. "Miss Pemberton," he said quietly, "I think we should keep our relationship strictly professional." The gentle rebuke hit Savannah like a slap. She realized that her comment, which would have been welcomed and reciprocated in her usual social circles, was inappropriate here. More than that, it revealed her assumption that she could use her attractiveness to gain special treatment or attention, even from someone who had just demonstrated that he treated all patients equally. As Dr. Williams completed her examination in professional silence, Savannah felt something cracking inside her chest. Not pain exactly, but the uncomfortable sensation of world views shifting and old certainties crumbling. That night, Savannah sat in her Lincoln Park penthouse, nursing a glass of Bordeaux and staring out at the city lights. The evening stretched ahead of her, empty, predictable, and suddenly meaningless. Usually she would call friends for dinner at Le Bernardin or catch up on gossip about who was dating whom in their social circle. Instead, she found herself replaying the day's events, analyzing every moment with uncomfortable clarity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Charles. "Dinner at RPM tomorrow? Father wants to discuss the Whitman-Pemberton merger possibilities." The casual reference to their family's business relationship as a precursor to their personal one made her stomach turn. How many of her relationships were built on financial compatibility rather than genuine connection? How many of her friendships existed because of shared trust funds rather than shared values? She thought about Dr. Williams kneeling beside Mrs. Chen, speaking her language and treating her pain with the same urgency he would show to any of his wealthy patients. The image contrasted sharply with her memory of the hospital fundraiser, where she had outbid Dr. Rodriguez for a vacation package he probably deserved more than she did. Savannah's laptop sat open on her marble coffee table, and impulsively she Googled Marcus Williams Dentist, Chicago. His professional website came up first, clean, simple, focused on patient care rather than luxury amenities. Under his biography, she learned that he had grown up in Bronzeville, worked his way through college, and spent his residency volunteering at community health centers. His achievements were impressive not because they had been handed to him, but because he had earned every single one. She clicked through to news articles about his practice, finding a feature story from the Chicago Tribune about young professionals giving back to underserved communities. Dr. Williams was quoted extensively, talking about the importance of accessible dental care and his commitment to treating patients regardless of their ability to pay. Healthcare shouldn't be a privilege, he had told the reporter. Everyone deserves to smile without shame, to eat without pain, to live with dignity. If my education and skills can help make that happen, then that's my responsibility as both a doctor and a human being. Savannah closed her laptop and walked to her floor-to-ceiling windows. From 30 floors up, the city looked like a circuit board, all gleaming lights and orderly patterns. But she knew that down there, real people were dealing with real problems, working multiple jobs to afford rent, choosing between medical care and groceries, navigating systems that favored those who already had advantages. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. "Darling, I just heard from Priscilla about the most dreadful scene at some dental office," her mother began without preamble. "She said you were there when some doctor was terribly rude to Richard Patterson. You know the Pattersons. They've been family friends for decades." Savannah felt her jaw tighten. "Mr. Patterson was the one being rude, Mother. Dr. Williams was treating emergency patients." "Well, I'm sure there are two sides to every story," Victoria replied diplomatically. "But Richard is quite upset. He's talking about filing complaints with the medical board and the Better Business Bureau. Really, Savannah, perhaps it's time to find a new dentist. Dr. Weinstein has an excellent practice downtown, and he knows how to treat his better clients appropriately." The assumption that she deserved better treatment because of her family name and bank balance made Savannah's skin crawl. "Dr. Williams is an excellent dentist," she heard herself saying. "He treats all his patients with respect." "Of course, dear," Victoria's tone suggested she was humoring a child. "But you have to consider appearances. What will people think if you're associated with that kind of unprofessionalism?" After hanging up, Savannah found herself thinking about appearances. How much of her life was constructed around what other people would think? How much energy she spent maintaining an image that felt increasingly hollow? She had been raised to believe that reputation mattered more than character, that social connections were more valuable than personal integrity. But Dr. Williams had been willing to lose a wealthy client rather than compromise his principles. He had risked his business relationships to defend his values, something Savannah had never seen anyone in her world do. She pulled up his interview again, reading his words more carefully this time. There was a depth of conviction in his statements that she envied. When had she last felt passionate about something beyond her own comfort and convenience? When had she ever sacrificed anything for a principle? A memory surfaced from her childhood. She must have been 7 or 8, watching her nanny, Maria, count coins from her purse to buy groceries for her own family. Even at that age, Savannah had understood that Maria worked for them so she could support her children, sending money back to relatives in El Salvador while living in a tiny apartment on the south side. She had asked her mother why Maria had to work so hard when they had so much money, and Victoria had explained that some people were born to serve while others were born to lead. It was natural order, she had said. Nothing to feel guilty about. But sitting in her expensive apartment, surrounded by luxury that she had never earned, Savannah wondered for the first time whether natural order was just a comfortable lie that privileged people told themselves to justify inequality. The doubt that had been growing since her encounter with Dr. Williams crystallized into something more substantial. Not quite guilt, not yet action, but a recognition that the world she had always taken for granted might be built on foundations far less solid than she had believed. Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here. Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts. Yes, every single comment. And it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. 3 weeks later, Savannah was leaving a tedious board meeting for her family's charitable foundation when she spotted a familiar figure across Michigan Avenue. Dr. Williams was walking quickly, his medical bag in hand, heading toward Grant Park. Something about his urgency made her curious enough to follow at a distance. He stopped at a homeless encampment that had formed near the lake, where about 20 people had set up tents and makeshift shelters. Savannah watched from behind a tree as he approached a group gathered around an elderly man who was clearly in distress. "Hey, Mr. Samuel," Dr. Williams said, kneeling beside the man with the same gentle attention he had shown Mrs. Chen. "I got your message. Let me take a look at that tooth." Savannah moved closer, staying hidden behind a maintenance building. She could see Dr. Williams unpacking dental instruments from his bag, setting up a portable light, and speaking quietly to the man while examining his mouth. Other members of the homeless community gathered around, clearly familiar with the doctor and comfortable with his presence. "Doc, you're an angel," said a woman in her 50s, her shopping cart filled with belongings. "Mr. Samuel been in pain for days, and none of us had money for a dentist." "Nobody should have to live with dental pain," Dr. Williams replied, preparing what looked like a local anesthetic. "This might pinch a little, Mr. Samuel, but then we'll get you feeling better." As he worked, other people approached with various health concerns. A young man showed him an infected cut on his hand. A woman asked about pain medication for her arthritic joints. Dr. Williams treated each person with patience and respect, never rushing, never making them feel like charity cases. "Doc," called a teenager who couldn't have been older than 17. "My girlfriend's tooth has been bothering her, but she's scared to come see you." "Bring her by next week," Dr. Williams said, without looking up from his current patient. "We'll figure out the payment later. Nobody gets turned away for financial reasons." Savannah felt her throat tighten. This wasn't a publicity stunt or a tax write-off. There were no cameras, no witnesses from his social circle, no benefit to his reputation. Dr. Williams was here on his own time, using his own supplies, providing medical care to people who couldn't afford it because it was the right thing to do. She thought about her family's foundation, which gave away millions of dollars every year to carefully vetted causes that enhanced their social standing. Their charity was strategic, calculated to maximize both tax benefits and social recognition. But Dr. Williams was treating homeless people in a park because they needed help, not because it would look good in the society pages. "Dr. Williams," Mr. Samuel said when the procedure was finished, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Dr. Williams replied, packing up his equipment. "Just take care of yourself, and come see me if the pain comes back." As he prepared to leave, a commotion erupted near the street. 2 police officers were approaching the encampment, their expressions stern and official. "This is an illegal camping area," one of them announced. "You need to move along immediately or we'll start making arrests." The homeless community began to scatter nervously, gathering their belongings in panic. But Dr. Williams stepped forward, placing himself between the officers and the people he had been treating. "Officers," he said calmly, "these people aren't causing any trouble. I'm a doctor, and I was providing medical treatment. Some of these individuals need ongoing care." "Sir, this is a public park," the second officer replied. "Camping isn't permitted, regardless of medical needs." "Where do you suggest they go?" Dr. Williams asked, his voice remaining steady but carrying an edge of steel that Savannah recognized from the confrontation with Mr. Patterson. "The shelters are full. The waiting lists for housing assistance are 2 years long, and these people have immediate health needs that can't wait for bureaucracy." The first officer shifted uncomfortably. "That's not our problem, sir. We're just enforcing the law." "The law?" Dr. Williams repeated quietly. "And what law says that having nowhere to sleep is a crime? What law says that seeking medical treatment makes you a criminal?" Savannah watched the confrontation with growing amazement. Dr. Williams wasn't backing down, wasn't deferring to the officers' authority simply because they wore badges. He was standing up for people who had no voice, no power, no ability to defend themselves. The officers seemed unsure how to respond to his calm but unwavering resistance. After a few tense moments, they decided to retreat. "We'll be back tomorrow," one of them warned. "If they're still here, we'll have to take action." After the police left, Dr. Williams spent another hour helping the community members find temporary solutions, connecting some with shelter space, giving others information about social services, providing everyone with his personal phone number in case of medical emergencies. As Savannah watched him finally pack up and head back toward the street, she realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. This was a man who used his education, his status, and his skills not to elevate himself above others, but to lift others up. He could have built a practice in the wealthy suburbs, charging premium prices and surrounding himself with the comfortable insulation of affluence. Instead, he chose to work in a community that needed him, treating patients who couldn't always pay, and spending his free time providing care to the most vulnerable members of society. When Dr. Williams reached the street, he paused and looked directly at her hiding spot. Their eyes met across the distance, and Savannah felt her face flush with embarrassment at being caught spying. But instead of anger or annoyance, his expression showed something like understanding. He nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and invitation, then continued walking toward his car. As Savannah stood alone in the gathering dusk, watching the homeless community settle back into their temporary homes, she realized that everything she thought she knew about worth, value, and human dignity had been turned upside down. Dr. Marcus Williams had shown her what real leadership looked like, not commanding from a position of privilege, but serving from a place of principle. The next morning, Savannah arrived at her family's Kenilworth estate for their monthly business breakfast, her mind still reeling from what she had witnessed in Grant Park. The familiar routine, fresh squeezed, orange juice, Belgian waffles, and strategic discussions about their various investments felt surreal after watching Dr. Williams provide dental care to homeless patients. "You look tired, darling," Victoria observed, studying her daughters face across the polished mahogany table. "Are you getting enough sleep?" Before Savannah could respond, her father looked up from his financial reports. "Speaking of tired, I had an interesting conversation with Richard Patterson yesterday. He mentioned some trouble with that new dentist you've been seeing." Savannah's stomach clenched. "What kind of trouble?" "Well, apparently this Dr. Williams fellow has been causing quite a stir in the medical community," Reginald continued, his tone suggesting concern for her reputation. "Richard filed a complaint with the dental board about unprofessional conduct, and he's not the only one. Several prominent patients have complained about being treated like common charity cases." "That's not what happened," Savannah found herself saying, her voice sharper than intended. "Dr. Williams treats all his patients with respect. Mr. Patterson was being unreasonable." Victoria and Reginald exchanged the same meaningful look Savannah had noticed at dinner weeks earlier. "Sweetheart," Victoria said gently, "you have to understand how these things work. People like Richard Patterson don't complain lightly. If multiple established patients are having concerns, there might be more to the story." "What people like Richard Patterson don't understand," Savannah replied, surprising herself with her vehemence, "is that other people's pain matters just as much as their convenience." The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken implications. Victoria set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Savannah, what's gotten into you lately? You've been saying the strangest things." Her brother, Reginald IV, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up with interest. "Actually, this is perfect timing. I was just reading about this dentist online. Apparently, he's been providing free medical care to homeless people in Grant Park. Can you imagine the liability issues? Not to mention the health code violations." Savannah's heart began racing. They knew about his volunteer work, which meant someone had been watching, documenting, preparing to use his compassion against him. "How did you find out about that?" she asked carefully. "Richard Patterson hired a private investigator," Reginald IV said with obvious satisfaction. "Apparently, this Dr. Williams has quite a history of unprofessional behavior, treating patients in unsanitary conditions, practicing medicine without proper facilities, associating with criminals and drug addicts." "They're not criminals," Savannah snapped before she could stop herself. "They're human beings who need medical care." The shocked silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's fork clattered to her plate, and Reginald III slowly folded his newspaper, his attention now fully focused on his daughter. "Savannah Elizabeth Pemberton," her father said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 generations of family authority. "What exactly are you saying?" She looked around the table at her family, people she loved, people who had given her every advantage in life, people whose values had shaped her worldview for 28 years. But sitting there in their pristine dining room, surrounded by inherited wealth and inherited prejudices, she felt a chasm opening between who she had been and who she was becoming. "I'm saying that Dr. Williams is a good man who cares about people," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm saying that maybe we should admire someone who uses his skills to help those who can't help themselves, instead of trying to destroy him for it." Reginald III set his coffee cup down with deliberate control. "Savannah, I think you're confused about something very important. This man isn't helping people. He's enabling them. He's making it easier for these individuals to avoid taking responsibility for their own lives." "By treating their pain?" Savannah asked incredulously. "By removing the natural consequences of their choices," her father replied, his tone taking on the lecture quality she remembered from childhood. "These people are homeless because of decisions they've made. Addiction, laziness, poor life choices. When do-gooders like your dentist remove the discomfort that should motivate them to change, they're actually perpetuating the problem." Victoria nodded in agreement. "Your father's right, darling. It's like feeding stray cats. It just encourages more of them to congregate. These people need tough love, not handouts." Savannah felt something cold and hard forming in her chest. "You're talking about human beings like they're animals. We're talking about social dynamics and personal responsibility," Reginald IV interjected. "Look, I'm not heartless. I believe in charity, real charity, through established organizations with proper oversight and accountability. But what this dentist is doing is reckless vigilantism that makes him feel good while actually making the problem worse." The conversation continued around her, but Savannah found herself thinking about Mr. Samuel's face when Dr. Williams had relieved his pain, about the teenager who was worried about his girlfriend's tooth, about the woman with arthritis who needed help but had nowhere else to turn. These weren't abstract social problems or policy discussions. They were real people with real suffering. "Furthermore," her father continued, "your association with this kind of controversy reflects poorly on our family's reputation. The Pemberton name carries weight in this city, and we have responsibilities that extend beyond our personal preferences." "What? Responsibilities?" Savannah asked. "To maintain the standards that allow us to do good in the world?" Victoria explained, as if speaking to a child. "Our charitable foundation, your father's business relationships, our family's standing in the community, these things enable us to make a real difference through proper channels. We can't jeopardize that influence by appearing to endorse radical behavior." Savannah looked around the table again, seeing her family with new clarity. Their charity was conditional, strategic, designed to maintain their position while making them feel virtuous. They gave away millions of dollars, but never in ways that challenged the systems that had made their wealth possible in the first place. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Our influence isn't worth much if we're too afraid to use it for anything that actually matters." The breakfast ended in uncomfortable silence, but Savannah could feel the weight of her family's disapproval settling around her like a heavy blanket. As she drove back to the city, her phone buzzed with concerned texts from friends who had heard about the situation with her dentist. By afternoon, the pressure had intensified. Charles called to express his worry about her recent behavior, suggesting that maybe she needed a vacation or some time away from stress. Priscilla Ashworth Kane sent a link to an article about Dr. Williams in a conservative blog, accompanied by a message warning Savannah about the dangers of associating with radical elements. The article painted Dr. Williams as a dangerous agitator who was encouraging homelessness and enabling criminal behavior. It included quotes from concerned citizens about the health risks and property value impacts of his volunteer work. The piece concluded by suggesting that legitimate medical professionals should distance themselves from such unprofessional and irresponsible activities. As Savannah read through the increasingly hysterical comments section, she realized that her family's reaction was part of a larger campaign to discredit Dr. Williams. People with power and influence were using their resources to destroy a man whose only crime was caring about those who couldn't defend themselves. The recognition that she was part of this system, that her silence and compliance made her complicit in its cruelties, hit her like a physical blow. For the first time in her life, Savannah understood that neutrality was not neutral, that choosing comfort over justice was itself a choice with consequences. 2 days later, Savannah found herself sitting in Dr. Williams' waiting room after hours, having called and asked if she could speak with him privately. The office was quiet, the daytime bustle replaced by the soft hum of cleaning equipment and the distant sounds of traffic outside. When he emerged from his office, Dr. Williams looked tired but unsurprised to see her. "Miss Pemberton, how can I help you? I need to ask you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I need you to be honest with me." He gestured toward his office, and she followed him inside. The space was simple but warm, with diplomas on the walls, and photos of patients whose smiles he had restored. There were no luxury touches, no expensive art, just the functional beauty of a place where healing happened. "I know about Grant Park," she said without preamble. "I saw you there, treating those people." Dr. Williams leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "I see. And I need to understand why," Savannah continued, her hands clasping and unclasping in her lap. "I need to understand why you risk everything, your practice, your reputation, your financial security, for people who can't give you anything in return." He was quiet for a long moment, and Savannah found herself holding her breath, waiting for an answer that might change everything she thought she knew about the world. "Miss Pemberton," he said finally, "can I ask you something first? What do you think those people owe me?" The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? I mean, what do you think Mr. Samuel, the elderly gentleman with the infected tooth, what does he owe me for treating his pain?" Savannah frowned, confused by the direction of the conversation. "Well, nothing, I suppose. He can't pay." "Exactly," Dr. Williams said, leaning forward slightly. "He owes me nothing. So when I treat him, when I spend my time and use my supplies to help him, I'm not doing it because I expect something back. I'm doing it because he's in pain, and I have the ability to stop that pain." "But why?" Savannah pressed. "Why does that matter to you?" Dr. Williams stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "When I was 8 years old, my little sister Aisha developed a severe tooth infection. My mother worked 3 jobs, but we still didn't have dental insurance. We couldn't afford treatment." Savannah felt her stomach tighten, sensing where the story was heading. "The infection spread," he continued, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of old pain. "By the time we got her to the emergency room, she was septic. She spent 2 weeks in intensive care, and the medical bills bankrupted my family. We lost our apartment, had to move in with relatives, and my mother's credit was destroyed for years." "I'm sorry," Savannah whispered. "The thing is," Dr. Williams turned back to face her, "Aisha survived. She recovered completely, went on to become a nurse, has 3 beautiful children of her own. But that experience, watching someone I loved suffer because we couldn't afford health care, it changed something fundamental in me." He returned to his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I realized that health care isn't really about medicine or procedures or even skill. It's about human dignity. It's about the radical idea that everyone deserves to live without preventable suffering, regardless of their bank account." Savannah sat in silence, absorbing his words. She thought about her own childhood, when any hint of illness had been met with immediate, expert care. She had never watched a loved one suffer because of money, had never had to choose between medical treatment and rent, had never experienced the desperation that came with being unable to afford basic care. "But the risks," she said finally. "My family says you could lose your license, face lawsuits, that you're being irresponsible." Dr. Williams smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Your family is probably right about the risks. I could face professional consequences, legal challenges, financial problems, but let me ask you this. What's the greater irresponsibility? Using my skills to help people who need them, or standing by and watching them suffer when I have the power to help?" The question hung in the air between them, and Savannah realized she had never been asked to consider moral responsibility in such stark terms. Her world was built on the assumption that following rules and maintaining respectability were the highest virtues, that personal reputation mattered more than personal conscience. "I've never thought about it that way," she admitted. "Most people don't have to," Dr. Williams replied gently. "When you've never been denied medical care because of money, when you've never had to watch someone you love suffer needlessly, it's easy to see healthcare as a privilege rather than a right." Savannah felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I don't know how to think about any of this. Everything I was taught, everything I believed about how the world works, it's all being turned upside down." Dr. Williams leaned forward, his expression kind but serious. "Miss Pemberton, can I be frank with you?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "You seem like a good person who's been raised with certain assumptions about the world. Those assumptions aren't necessarily malicious, but they are limiting. The question isn't whether you're a bad person for having those beliefs. The question is what you're going to do now that you're starting to see beyond them." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of possibilities and choices. Savannah realized that this conversation was a turning point, a moment when she could either retreat back into the comfortable certainties of her privileged world or step forward into something more challenging, but ultimately more authentic. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she whispered. "You're not supposed to do anything," Dr. Williams replied. "But you could choose to do something, and that choice, that's where real freedom begins." The crisis came 3 weeks later, triggered by a city council meeting about the proposed redevelopment of Grant Park. Savannah had been following the issue with growing alarm, watching as her family's friends and business associates rallied. Support for a plan that would essentially criminalize homelessness in the area where Dr. Williams volunteered. The meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in City Hall, and Savannah arrived to find the chamber packed with an uncomfortable mix of homeless advocates, wealthy residents, and business leaders. She spotted her father near the front, sitting with Richard Patterson and several other men she recognized from country club board meetings. Dr. Williams was there too, sitting in the section reserved for speakers, his expression calm but alert. He wore a simple dark suit that emphasized his quiet dignity, and Savannah noticed how several homeless individuals had positioned themselves near him, clearly drawing comfort from his presence. The first hour was dominated by presentations from city planners and developers outlining the proposed renovation that would transform Grant Park into an upscale commercial and residential district. The language was all about revitalization and community improvement, but Savannah recognized the subtext. This was about removing undesirable elements to make room for profitable development. When Richard Patterson took the podium, his speech was polished and persuasive. He talked about public safety, property values, and the need to address what he called the vagrant problem through firm but compassionate relocation to appropriate facilities. "We're not talking about criminalizing poverty," Patterson said, his voice carrying the practiced sincerity of a skilled politician. "We're talking about establishing standards that benefit everyone, including those individuals who have been camping illegally in our public spaces. They deserve better than living in tents. They deserve professional services, structured assistance, and the motivation to rebuild their lives." The applause was enthusiastic, particularly from the section where Savannah's father sat. She watched him nod approvingly, his face displaying the satisfaction of someone hearing his own views articulated with eloquence. But when Dr. Williams approached the podium, the energy in the room shifted. There were scattered boos from some sections, supportive applause from others, and a tension that suggested this moment had been anticipated by everyone present. "My name is Dr. Marcus Williams," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. "I'm a dentist with a practice in Lincoln Park, and for the past 2 years I've been providing volunteer medical care to the homeless community that gathers near Grant Park." More boos, louder now, and someone shouted, "Grandstanding," from the back. The council chairman called for order, but the hostility was palpable. Dr. Williams waited for silence, then continued. "I'm here tonight because I've gotten to know these individuals as patients and as human beings. I've treated Mr. Samuel Chen's infected teeth, helped Teresa Martinez manage her diabetes complications, and provided care for dozens of others who have nowhere else to turn. He paused, scanning the crowd, and Savannah felt his eyes briefly meet hers across the packed chamber. "These aren't statistics or policy problems," he continued. "They're people with names, with stories, with the same basic needs and dignity that all of us possess. Some are veterans dealing with PTSD and addiction. Some are families who lost their homes to medical bankruptcy or job loss. Some are young people who aged out of foster care with no support system." The chamber had grown quieter, though the tension remained thick. The proposed redevelopment will displace approximately 80 people who currently shelter in and around Grant Park. The city's plan calls for relocating them to existing shelters, but those shelters are already at capacity. The waiting list for permanent supportive housing is currently 18 months long, so when we talk about relocation, we're really talking about making these people disappear. "Good!" someone shouted from Patterson's section, prompting angry responses from homeless advocates. Dr. Williams raised his voice slightly to cut through the growing chaos. "I understand the desire for clean, safe, economically productive public spaces, but I'm asking this council to consider the human cost of prioritizing property values over human lives." At that moment, Reginald Patterson III stood up in his section. "Dr. Williams," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "No one is questioning your compassion, but surely you understand that enabling this kind of camping is actually cruel? These people need structure, accountability, and professional social services, not well-meaning handouts that allow them to avoid facing their problems." The chamber erupted in competing cheers and boos. Savannah watched her father's face, seeing the satisfaction of someone who believed he had made an unassailable moral point. Around him, other members of their social circle nodded approvingly, secure in their conviction that they were advocating for tough love rather than callous abandonment. Dr. Williams waited for order to return, then responded with devastating, quiet clarity. "Mr. Pemberton, I appreciate your concern for accountability and structure, but I have to ask, when you say these people need to face their problems, what specific problems are you referring to? Teresa Martinez became homeless when she couldn't work during cancer treatment and lost her apartment. Should she be held accountable for getting sick? James Washington is a Vietnam veteran with PTSD who can't afford both medication and rent on his disability check. Should he be held accountable for serving his country?" The silence was profound. Savannah felt her chest tighten as she watched her father's face, seeing confusion and discomfort replace his earlier confidence. "These individuals aren't homeless because they're avoiding responsibility," Dr. Williams continued. "They're homeless because our society has failed to provide adequate health care, mental health services, affordable housing, and living wages. They're the victims of our collective choices, and now we want to criminalize them for the consequences of those choices." Patterson stood up again, his face red with indignation. "This is exactly the kind of radical rhetoric that's destroying our communities. Personal responsibility used to mean something in this country. It still does," Dr. Williams replied, his voice carrying a steel edge that Savannah recognized. "But personal responsibility includes the responsibility of those with power and privilege to care for those without. It includes the responsibility of a wealthy society to ensure that no one suffers from preventable illness, sleeps without shelter, or goes hungry in the midst of abundance." The chamber exploded into chaos, shouting, applause, angry voices calling for order. But Savannah heard none of it. She was staring at her father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in her life. His face displayed the frustrated anger of someone whose worldview was being challenged by inconvenient facts, whose comfortable assumptions were being exposed as inadequate excuses for indifference. As security guards moved to restore order, Dr. Williams stepped away from the podium, his dignity intact despite the hostility surrounding him. Several homeless individuals stood to applaud him, and Savannah noticed that their faces showed not just gratitude but love, the kind of respect that came from being truly seen and valued. In that moment, watching the contrast between Dr. Williams's quiet moral courage and her father's defensive self-righteousness, Savannah felt something fundamental break open inside her chest. The choice she had been avoiding for weeks suddenly became crystal clear and terrifying and absolutely necessary. Savannah didn't sleep that night. She sat in her living room until dawn, replaying the city council meeting and confronting truths she had spent her entire life avoiding. By morning, she had made a decision that would change everything. She began with research, spending hours reading about homelessness, poverty, and healthcare access in Chicago. The statistics were staggering. Thousands of people living without permanent shelter, many of them employed but unable to afford rent, others dealing with mental illness or addiction without adequate support systems. The more she learned, the more she understood that Dr. Williams wasn't exaggerating or grandstanding. He was simply telling the truth about a crisis that people like her family chose not to see. At noon, she called her assistant and cleared her schedule. Then she drove to Dr. Williams's office, arriving during lunch hours when the waiting room would be less crowded. "Miss Pemberton," Keisha said with surprise. "Do you have an appointment?" "I need to speak with Dr. Williams," Savannah replied. "It's important." When he emerged from his office, Dr. Williams looked tired but unsurprised to see her. "How can I help you?" "I want to help," she said simply. "With your volunteer work, with the homeless patients, with whatever you need. I want to be useful." He studied her face for a long moment. "This isn't a charity project, Miss Pemberton. This isn't something you can dabble in when you're feeling guilty and then abandon when it gets difficult or socially inconvenient." "I know," she replied, though she wasn't sure she truly understood the depth of what she was committing to. "I know this changes everything, but I can't go back to pretending I don't see what's happening." Dr. Williams nodded slowly. "All right, but we do this properly. If you're going to work with vulnerable populations, you need training. You need to understand the complexities of homelessness, addiction, mental illness, and trauma. And you need to be prepared for the consequences." "What consequences?" "Your family won't understand. Your friends will think you've lost your mind. People in your social circle will question your judgment and your associations. You'll be seen as naive at best, dangerous at worst. Are you ready for that?" Savannah thought about her father's face at the city council meeting, about her mother's gentle but persistent pressure to maintain appearances, about Charles and his assumptions about their future together. She thought about the comfortable, predictable life that stretched ahead of her if she chose to remain silent and compliant. "Yes," she said, and meant it. The training began immediately. Dr. Williams connected her with social workers, public health professionals, and advocates who taught her about the systemic causes of homelessness and the complexities of providing services to marginalized populations. She learned about trauma-informed care, about the difference between charity and justice, about the importance of listening without judgment. More importantly, she met the people she would be serving. Dr. Williams introduced her to his regular patients, not as a wealthy benefactor or a curiosity, but as someone who wanted to learn and help. She discovered that Mr. Samuel had been a jazz musician before arthritis made it impossible for him to play piano. Teresa Martinez showed her photographs of the grandchildren she rarely saw because she couldn't afford bus fare to visit them. James Washington told her stories about Vietnam that made her understand how trauma could follow someone for decades. These weren't the faceless, frightening strangers she had been taught to fear. They were complex, intelligent, dignified people, dealing with circumstances that could happen to anyone. Their stories forced her to confront uncomfortable questions about luck, privilege, and the myth of meritocracy that had shaped her worldview. After 2 weeks of intensive education, Savannah began accompanying Dr. Williams on his volunteer rounds. She helped sterilize instruments, organized supplies, and provided emotional support to patients who were often more concerned about being judged than about their physical pain. The work was difficult, sometimes heartbreaking, but it also filled her with a sense of purpose she had never experienced. For the first time in her life, she was using her time and resources for something that mattered beyond her own comfort and convenience. The transformation wasn't just philosophical, it was practical. She liquidated some of her investment portfolio to purchase medical supplies and fund emergency dental procedures. She used her family's connections to pressuring local politicians about housing policy and healthcare access. She leveraged her social status to attend fundraisers and board meetings where she could advocate for the homeless community. Most importantly, she began speaking up. When friends made dismissive comments about those people, she challenged their assumptions. When her social circle complained about the visibility of homeless camps, she explained the systemic failures that created those conditions. When family members suggested that tough love was the answer to addiction and mental illness, she shared what she had learned about trauma and recovery. The pushback was immediate and intense. Charles broke up with her after she missed a country club gala to volunteer at a medical clinic. Priscilla Ashworth Kane stopped inviting her to social events, whispering to mutual friends about Savannah's radical phase and unfortunate associations. Her parents oscillated between disappointment and concern, convinced that she was throwing away her future for people who didn't deserve her sacrifice. But for every relationship that became strained or severed, Savannah discovered deeper connections with people who shared her values. She built friendships with social workers, nurses, and advocates who were working to create systemic change. She found mentors among people who had dedicated their careers to justice rather than profit. Most unexpectedly, she found herself developing a deeper respect and affection for Dr. Williams. Working alongside him, she witnessed his extraordinary combination of clinical excellence and human compassion. He never talked down to patients, never made them feel ashamed of their circumstances, never treated their problems as anything less than urgent and important. 3 months after the city council meeting, Savannah stood in Grant Park on a cold December evening, helping Dr. Williams set up a mobile dental clinic funded by her liquidated stock portfolio. Around them, volunteers from various organizations provided warm meals, legal advice, and social services to nearly 100 homeless individuals. "You know," Dr. Williams said as they prepared for the evening's work, "when you first came to my office, I never imagined this would happen." Savannah looked around at the organized chaos of genuine community care. People helping people not because they had to, but because it was right. "Neither did I," she admitted, "but I can't imagine my life any other way now." As the first patients approached their station, Savannah realized that she had found something she had been searching for without knowing it, not just purpose, but authenticity. For the first time in her 28 years, she was exactly who she was meant to be. Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here. Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts. Yes, every single comment. And it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. The opportunity for Savannah's most public declaration came 6 months later at the annual Chicago Healthcare Summit, where her family's foundation was scheduled to present a major grant to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. As a board member and the foundation's public face, Savannah was expected to deliver the keynote address to an audience of medical professionals, philanthropists, and city officials. But instead of the carefully scripted speech her family had prepared, one that emphasized their generosity while reinforcing existing power structures, Savannah had written something entirely different. She stood at the podium in the Palmer House ballroom, looking out at 500 of Chicago's most influential residents. Her parents sat in the front row, their faces beaming with pride that would soon turn to shock. Charles was there with his new fiancée, a suitable replacement from their social circle. Richard Patterson and his wife occupied a prominent table, still convinced that their campaign against Dr. Williams would eventually succeed. "Good evening," Savannah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. 6 months ago, I stood in this room at a similar event, writing checks and making speeches about the importance of healthcare philanthropy. I believed then that charity was about giving away money to worthy causes, about maintaining institutions that serve our community. The audience settled into attentive silence, expecting the usual blend of gratitude, humility, and gentle fundraising that characterized such events. But I've learned something important since then, Savannah continued. Real healthcare isn't about charity. It's about justice. And justice isn't about giving away our excess. It's about changing systems that create inequality in the first place. A murmur began to ripple through the crowd. Her father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing that his daughter was veering dangerously off script. Tonight, the Pemberton Foundation is proud to announce a $5 million grant, Savannah said, and the audience began to applaud. But she raised her hand for silence. However, this grant won't be going to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The applause died abruptly, replaced by confused whispers and sharp intakes of breath. Savannah could see her mother's face draining of color. Instead, we're funding the creation of the Chicago Community Health Initiative, a program that will provide free medical and dental care to homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, and anyone else who has been excluded from our current healthcare system. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Some people applauded, but many more began talking among themselves in shocked voices. She could hear Richard Patterson's voice rising above the crowd. "This is outrageous! This wasn't what was agreed upon!" Savannah waited for relative quiet before continuing. "This initiative will be led by Dr. Marcus Williams, a dentist who has spent years providing unpaid care to Chicago's most vulnerable residents. Dr. Williams understands that health care is a human right, not a privilege to be earned through wealth or status." At the mention of Dr. Williams's name, the reaction intensified. Several prominent donors stood up and began walking toward the exits, their faces dark with anger. But Savannah also noticed that many of the healthcare workers in attendance, nurses, residents, social workers, were applauding enthusiastically. "Some of you are wondering why I'm doing this," Savannah continued, raising her voice to be heard over the growing commotion. "Some of you think I've been manipulated or that I've lost my mind. But the truth is simpler than that. I've finally learned to see." Her father was now standing, gesturing frantically for her to stop. But Savannah had passed the point of no return. "For 28 years, I lived in a bubble of privilege that protected me from understanding how the world actually works. I believed that wealth was proof of virtue, that poverty was evidence of failure, that the systems that benefited me were fair and just. I was wrong about all of it." The ballroom was now in chaos, with people shouting questions and accusations. Security guards were moving closer to the podium, clearly uncertain about whether they should intervene. "The homeless individuals that Dr. Williams treats aren't there because they're lazy or immoral," Savannah declared, her voice carrying over the noise. "They're there because our society has failed them, because people like us, people with resources and influence, have chosen comfort over conscience, profit over people." She could see her family's faces clearly now, her father red with rage, her mother pale with social mortification, her brother frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to do damage control with their business partners. "So yes, the Pemberton Foundation is changing direction," Savannah concluded. "We're no longer interested in charity that makes us feel good while preserving systems that cause harm. We're committed to justice, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs us socially and financially." As she stepped away from the podium, the room erupted into competing demonstrations, some people booing and shouting accusations, others cheering and applauding. Several board members of major hospitals were already on their phones, undoubtedly discussing the implications of this public break with established philanthropic norms. Dr. Williams appeared at her side as she left the stage, his presence steadying her as they navigated through the crowd. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm perfect," she replied, and realized she meant it. For the first time in her life, she had used her privilege for something that mattered, had spoken truth to power, even when it cost her everything she had been raised to value. As they reached the ballroom's exit, Savannah could hear her father's voice calling her name, demanding that she return and fix what she had broken. But she didn't look back. The life she was leaving behind, comfortable, predictable, morally comfortable, had never really been hers anyway. What lay ahead was uncertain, But it was authentic, and that made all the difference. 1 year later, Savannah sat in the community health clinic that had become her second home, reviewing patient files with Dr. Williams as they prepared for another busy day. The space was modest but functional, located in a renovated warehouse in Bronzeville, equipped with donated medical equipment and staffed by volunteers who believed that healthcare was a human right. The Chicago Community Health Initiative had exceeded everyone's expectations, providing free medical and dental care to over 2,000 patients in its first year. What had started as Savannah's dramatic break with her family's philanthropic tradition had evolved into a sustainable model that other cities were beginning to replicate. "Mrs. Chen is doing well with her new dentures," Dr. Williams reported, making notes in her chart. "She said she hasn't been able to smile without pain in 15 years. Savannah nodded, remembering the elderly woman's tears of joy when Dr. Williams had fitted her with properly made teeth that allowed her to eat and speak comfortably. These moments, witnessing the restoration of dignity through health care, had become the most meaningful part of her new life. The personal costs had been significant. Her relationship with her family remained strained, though recent months had brought signs of slow healing. Her father still couldn't understand her choices, but he had stopped trying to convince her to return to their old way of life. Her mother sent careful, loving messages that avoided discussing politics or philanthropy. Her brother had surprised everyone by making a small donation to the clinic, accompanied by a note that simply said, "I'm proud of you, even if I don't understand you." Financially, Savannah had learned to live on a fraction of her former budget. She had sold her penthouse and moved to a modest apartment near the clinic, had traded designer clothes for practical work attire, had discovered that happiness didn't correlate with luxury. The trust fund that had once seemed essential for her. Security now funded medical supplies and patient care. More importantly, she had found a community of people who shared her values. The clinic's staff and volunteers came from diverse backgrounds: social workers, nurses, retired teachers, former patients who wanted to give back. But they were united by a commitment to justice and human dignity that made their work feel like ministry rather than mere profession. Her romantic life had also transformed in ways she hadn't anticipated. The attraction she felt for Dr. Williams had deepened over months of working together, but it was based on respect and shared purpose rather than the superficial compatibility that had characterized her previous relationships. He challenged her, thinking, supported her growth, and treated her as an equal partner in their work rather than a wealthy benefactor to be courted and flattered. "Savannah," Dr. Williams said, interrupting her reflections, "there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you." She looked up from the patient files, noting something unusually serious in his expression. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment, then smiled with a vulnerability she had rarely seen from him. "We've been working together for over a year now, and I've watched you transform from someone who saw charity as writing checks into someone who understands that real change requires